I'm Paige Ruane. I'm a co-founder of Partners for Climate Action Hudson Valley and a co-director of the recently launched Building Decarbonization Grant. Here at PCA, we support ecological leadership across the Hudson Valley by deploying capital in its many forms to support local equitable solutions. We're based in Chatham, New York. Our two main priority areas are ecological restoration, with a focus on establishing community forests and cultivating native habitat. And we've just recently launched a new Building Decarbonization Grant program. We are working on helping all of you decarbonize your building stock, nonprofits and municipalities. So that's really what prompted us to want to bring our speakers in today to hear a related story about building decarbonization. We'll pop the link to our grant opportunity in the chat. But this morning's session is entitled Lessons from BCAN: How One Community Organized to Decarbonize Their Buildings. If you haven't been on one of these monthly webinars before, they're part of a series intended as learning opportunities for our local climate community, and we're really glad you could join us today. My colleague Vanessa Bertozzi will be facilitating today's session. She'll introduce our two guest speakers, and followed by a moderated Q&A and then an audience Q&A. I encourage you to hold your questions until after the presentations, and then we'll address them during that portion of the webinar. And at that time, you can feel free to raise your hand, physical or virtual. We will call on you, or you can drop your questions in the chat. And we'll aim to wrap up at about 9:30. I also kindly ask that you keep yourselves on mute when not speaking. And take it away, Vanessa.
Great. Hi, everyone. So glad you all could make it. I'm Vanessa, and as Paige said, I'm the co-director of the Building Decarbonization Grant program at PCA. And we are just thrilled to dig into this topic of transitioning our buildings off of fossil fuels, and meet with these two fine gentlemen today to tell us about their approach in their corner of the Hudson Valley. So our first speaker will be Vikas Ashoka, who uses he, they pronouns. Vikas is a climate justice activist in Beacon, New York. And from 2021 through 2022, he served on the leadership team for the Sunrise Movement in New York City and co-led the Hub's campaign for the federal climate jobs program that actually led to the creation of the American Climate Corps in September 2023. So congratulations on that. And after moving to the Hudson Valley, Vikas helped organize a statewide coalition called Climate Can't Wait 2022 and led a bike trek to raise awareness for their 2022 legislative bill package. And in July 2022, he co-founded the BCAN Climate Action Now, BCAN group, which successfully organized a campaign to pass a municipal electrification mandate in March 2023. Vikas is employed as a software engineer at Rewiring America and lives in Beacon with his wife Erin, their son Oak, and their two dogs, Truman and Eleanor. So Vikas, why don't you share your screen and take it away?
Absolutely. Thank you, Vanessa. And while I'm pulling this up, I want to say thank you for Partners for Climate Action for all the work you do. And I'm very excited about this new grant. And I hope you all look into it. As an aside, before I get started, it's what we're finding in the building electrification space is there's so many remediation problems and challenges for low-income and disadvantaged communities to electrify that, you know, having some funding to get folks past that initial burden is a big game changer if we're thinking about equity. And so I appreciate that PCA is working on that. So as Vanessa said, I'm Vikas Ashoka. I have 10 minutes, so it's 8:38 right now. I'll stick to time. Live here in Beacon, and you know, I consider myself an activist for climate justice, which, you know, is about addressing climate change in a way that also promotes equity. And the topic I'm going to be talking about today, before Thomas, who's also a BCAN member, goes ahead and talks more specifics for you, I'm going to talk about how to organize for local climate action. So a quick overview. I'll start with the beginnings of BCAN, why we were formed, and how we decided on our values and strategy. I'll talk mostly about our gas-free buildings campaign, which we started last fall and was able to pass unanimously through Beacon City Council in March. And then finally wrap up with some advice for other groups. For full disclosure, I have an ulterior motive where I would love for BCAN-like groups to start up all over the Hudson Valley, or for existing groups to kind of learn from what we've done and evolve on it. And so I would love to help you all do that. Okay, so the beginnings of BCAN. Transport yourself to spring 2022. The Inflation Reduction Act has yet to pass, and even when it does, it has lost most of the kind of equity elements that a lot of us on the climate justice front were focusing on in the Build Back Better Act. And those of us who were in Beacon and the surrounding area have been looking for an organizing home to like push for these things at the local level now that the federal opportunity has passed. And as you talk to your neighbors, you'll find, if you are in my head in spring 2022, that there's so many people who care about climate justice, and they organized against Dan Scammer, and they have sung with Pete Seeger for decades, and yet there's no place for them to be to actually affect political change. And so Martin Fowler, my wife Erin Ashoka, and I decided it's about time we fix that for the city of Beacon, at least, and the surrounding area. And so we came up with a box for what we wanted any group that we were a part of to exist in. The first was that we wanted folks to have, we wanted to create a space for folks to have a long-term commitment to climate justice. We're not wanting to focus on one campaign or one issue. We recognize that what we're trying to do is build long-term power for Green New Deal style policies locally and in larger systems, which you can't do in one short period of time. So in order to do that, we have 3 interlocking guiding principles. One is we're working on structural political change. I sort of hinted at that with the long term. Basically, you can't change the structures to address climate change in one election. You can't do it with one single policy. Every win is going to be marginal. And so we have to work towards changing the system long term. Secondly, to the left is community care. If we're going to work on stuff in the long term, we need to take care of our own members and also our wider community. Because climate change is going to, even if we had solved everything this year or with the Inflation Reduction Act, the nature of climate change is that we're going to have increased disasters and catastrophes for a while until things get better. And we're not even there yet. And so how do we take care of our communities through that while we're working on the real solutions? Third is we believe that climate groups and climate activists need to have partnerships with other justice-aligned organizations. This is why you will see that BCAN has worked on issues that maybe don't have an obvious climate angle. For example, we have been very involved, particularly in the spring and summer, with supporting the asylum seekers. And the angle for us is that we need to get good at supporting climate refugees. And so helping refugees in general is a strong skill to build. So we came up with that. And that's basically all we came up with before our first meetings. And then in those first meetings, what we did is we invited folks who were like-minded, who we knew, but maybe who weren't otherwise spending a lot of time organizing, into the space to ask, what are the things that you would be looking for in an organization that does this work? And so we co-created a 25-year vision for ourselves, which is very lofty and probably cannot be done in 25 years, even the best case scenario, but it was a good exercise. And then some group norms and commitments to each other that we hold ourselves to regularly. And then very quickly after that, so our first meeting was in July, we started having conversations about our first campaign in August 2022, just a month later, I think 2 meetings later. And the reason why is one of the things we heard from our membership, and I think is probably fairly common, is that people don't want to sit around in meetings. They want to actually do work that makes change. And so we started with a few different proposals, and we eventually got to the concept of a gas-free buildings campaign in Beacon. So a little bit about how we chose that. We were looking for a campaign that we could, that would teach us the skills to win larger campaigns later on. We were looking for something that was ambitious, that no one was talking about, but was still, we thought, winnable after doing some local power analysis. And 3, we wanted to be able to use the local win to achieve larger goals. So by passing an all-electric buildings act, type bill in the city of Beacon, we knew that even if we were to lose, we were popularizing the state version of that bill, which eventually was included in the state budget just 2 weeks after we passed ours here in Beacon. And although a much less ambitious timeline than what the city of Beacon did. And part of why, and then lastly, and this was more just a nice kind of circumstance for us, is we had this relationship with Food and Water Watch, and they were wanting to help us on this. And so to have a staffed organization support a volunteer grassroots organization that had just started was very valuable. And then we got to work. And this is, I think, the thing that you'll see in the next few slides that I really want to hit home is a lot of activists, a lot of people who care about this space skip step 2. But I would argue that step 2 is the most important step. And that is to talk to people. And so part 1 is go where the people are. We tabled at, Beacon, we're blessed to have a lot of different events and festivals. And so we tabled at every one we could to talk about our gas-free buildings campaign. We were at the farmers market at least once a month. And we were gathering petition signatures from kind of everyone who came. There were Republicans, there were Democrats, there were people who haven't voted in years. And then there were really active climate folks who signed as well. I think the thing that we did that was a little unique as well is we knocked on a lot of doors, somewhere in the thousands. We didn't have great record keeping, but it was a significant amount of doors. And same thing, we knocked on almost every door we came across in a neighborhood, which allowed us to have conversations outside of like our climate bubbles. And what we found is that a lot of people, maybe they had some concerns, some questions, some curiosities, but people were open to having a conversation with neighbors when they had the opportunity. And most people either signed our petition or expressed that they just wanted to learn more, but they weren't against us. There were very, very few people who were against this concept, and that was a key learning. And third, we hosted our own events, particularly in October of last year. We hosted what started as a teach-in and then accidentally became a huge festival called Taproots, where we had music and free things and activities. We're doing it again this year on November 4th in the afternoon, if anyone's trying to see our evolution of Taproots. But yeah, and inviting people into a space that was truly free and truly just for the community, I think also garnered a lot of goodwill and allowed us to talk about our gas-free buildings campaign in many different ways to folks who came. And so this is a map of, I don't think this was the most up-to-date. I stopped keeping it up to date at some point, but this was our map of everyone who signed our petition in the city of Beacon. We left off the people outside. And so it was a pretty wide cross-section of the community. Step 3 is work with government. This is where I think most groups start, but we only started after we had popularized and worked on a draft ourselves. We had a great partner in Paloma Wake and Dan Imar Blair, 2 council members. And then as they worked on the inside game, we continued to be doing stuff outside, knocking doors, having the events, tabling. But when the time came, they let us know when the important times to mobilize are. And that partnership was really important to us. And so we mobilized kind of at the beginning to make a splash. We mobilized during the important council meetings and at the public hearings. And finally, we won in March 2023. I meant to replace this with our rally flyer, but this was after Taproots, which I'm also was very proud of. And then 6 is Begin Again. So since May, we've been running our second campaign, which is called our Beautiful Futures campaign. And it's a very different campaign that is maybe beside the point here, but I can talk about it in the Q&A if people want. But everything has been leveled up. We learned a lot in the fall and winter and spring, and now we're going to next steps. So my advice for other groups, I tried to keep it short here, but like if you're starting a new thing, my belief is you need 3+ committed people, like committed to this idea, who already have some strong community ties. Invite like-minded people to help co-create the actual group, and focus on your vision and norms, and then start a campaign as soon as possible. And winning that campaign, choose something ambitious but winnable, and work to work on together and to learn skills, and really come up with a really clear strategy of how you're going to win, or at least if you don't win, fail in a way that helps you win next time. Organize your community. That means talk to people, and then find allies in local government to do the inside game while you focus on the outside game. And that's it. So, thanks for your time. That was a super high-level version of everything we're doing. If you can learn more about what we're currently up to at beaconcan.org, beacon.org costs like $200,000. So Beacon Can is what we're at. And then if you want to hear actually Thomas and Aaron on a podcast, that's Beaconites. And then there's 2 really lovely articles, one about our winning gas-free buildings, and then one written by one of our members about how community activism is helping her with her climate despair, that I think are good reads.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much, Vikas. That was amazing. And lots of questions, but we'll hold those for now. And we're going to move right into our second speaker, who is Thomas Wright. Thomas is also a member of BCAN and was born and raised in California's San Joaquin Valley. He earned a degree in architecture from UC Berkeley and is the co-founder and co-president of Atlas Industries and Atlas Studios. Founded in Brooklyn, Atlas Industries is a multidisciplinary design and manufacturing firm now in its 30th year. And Atlas Studios is a creative community of commercial tenants housed in a restored historic industrial building in Newburgh, New York, that we'll hear a bit about. So Thomas resides in Beacon along with his wife and 2 sons, where he's chair of the Greenway Committee and member of the Conservation Advisory Committee. So also wearing that kind of, as Vika said, that inside baseball hat. So Thomas, why don't we have you share your screen and take it away.
Thanks, Vanessa. Can we see the before picture, the dilapidated picture?
Yes, that looks great.
Fantastic. Yep. Great. Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. And thanks, Partners for Climate Action, for the invitation to speak today. And also, before I get too much further along, Vikas, excellent presentation. Thank you. That was really great. Atlas Industries and Atlas Studios makes its home in a 55,000 square foot, 100-year-old, 3-story masonry building in Newburgh, New York. We had been in Brooklyn for over 20 years when we decided to relocate outside of New York City. What started out with a search for a new home for our company ended up as a dream for a creative community in this amazing historic city. We purchased the building in May of 2012 and spent the next 3 years renovating it, starting with opening up and restoring over 200 windows that had been bricked in by the previous owner. The building was as solid as a rock, but we replaced roof, plumbing, electrical, and HVAC systems. We built out partitions to create office and studio space for over 40 tenants. The challenge was how to provide heating for that many separate studios in a space-efficient way. After installing a gas furnace in the first space we built and gas blowers in our workshop, I'm thankful that we landed on cold climate air source heat pumps for our heating and air conditioning needs. At the time, we were certainly not focused on electrification, so we could have just as easily installed gas heat throughout the building. I'm so glad we didn't go down that road, given all the subsequent work we did and our more recent commitment to electrification. In hindsight, the fact that we could deliver heating and cooling and didn't require an interior air handler and ductwork makes it an obvious choice for a space like this. Preserving the quality of the architecture was of paramount importance. We didn't like the idea of exposed ductwork and building out closets for air handlers. The wall mount ductless approach provided a solution that was flexible and tread lightly on the look and feel of the interior. With few exceptions, the line sets are completely hidden in the interior walls. As I'm sure you're all aware by now, the first rule of electrification retrofits is to address the efficiency of the building envelope. And as you can see, we pretty much completely broke that rule. Given the historic nature of the building, there were very few changes that we were able or willing to make to the building. These are the existing steel sash windows and all their leaky single pane glory. In addition, there's so much glass, interior insulation would have been limited in return for the very high cost. And of course, replacing windows was a non-starter for our budget and financing realities. As a result, the building is more of a leaky tent than a high-performance envelope. Although we are gobbling up more energy than the same size building built with today's building codes, the good news is that as of May 2019, we are sourcing almost 100% of our electricity from offsite solar CSA. What we can't produce offsite, we source through 100% renewable energy ESCOs. In September of 2021, we had only one studio left with gas heat, plus our workshop. However, this represented over 12,000 square feet of space. It's a lot to take on all at once, so we chipped away at it with the first studio that fall, replacing the gas furnace with 2 ducted heat pumps. In spring of last year, we replaced our unreliable diesel delivery van with an all-electric Ford Transit. The process started about 8 months earlier, which was then the lead time on the delivery of this model. We love it. We are pushing the range a bit as we do a lot of installations in New York City, but as EV drivers realize, the prescription for range anxiety is a healthy dose of planning. About that same time, we installed on-demand hot water heaters in common area bathrooms and kitchen. On the one hand, the use is very intermittent and these units are very small, but given what I know about the operating costs of the low operating costs of a tanked heat pump water heater, and the fact that these on-demand units gobble up electrical capacity, I regret not finding the space for a tanked heat pump water heater. In December of 2022, we tackled our workshop, which was the last gas heated space in the building. We replaced gas-fired blowers with 7 ducted air source cold climate heat pumps. Now we had eliminated gas heating in the building. And we had AC in the workshop for the first time, which our employees are very happy about. and results in a better environment for finished products. We now have over 50 cold climate air source heat pumps providing heating and cooling for just over 40 tenants. And in case you're wondering, their utilities are included in the lease. Most of these heat pumps have been operating for almost 10 years, which is useful information in conversations with people who are skeptical about heat pumps delivering in leaky old historic buildings in the Northeast. Keep in mind that there is no electric resistance backup heat for the building. The last piece of the puzzle was a gas range in our office kitchen that we swapped out for our Samsung induction in March of this year. At about the same time, I completed the electrification of my home in Beacon. It was hugely gratifying to get to 100% electric with both my home and business. In addition to making good on a personal commitment to actively participate in the phase out of fossil fuels, the experience provided a case study of what to do and what to avoid for other homeowners and business owners interested in doing the same. Both projects aren't perfect from a building performance standpoint, but it does show that it is possible to bring electrification to residential renovations and commercial adaptive reuse projects. These experiences also drove home to me the monumental task ahead for electrification of existing buildings. While I felt confident that these acts would yield systemic impacts, the question remained as to how the building decarbonization process could be scaled up at the pace required by the climate emergency. With this in mind, I started to look for ways to make a difference with the remaining 99.99999% of the building decarbonization challenge. It was about this time that I began to volunteer with Rewiring America, who seemed to have some good ideas on the matter, particularly since the co-founder had written the book on demand-side decarbonization. I also joined Beacon's Conservation Advisory Committee with the goal of achieving results in electrification and decarbonization. Based on my experience as a chair and longtime member of the Greenway Committee, I was hopeful that raising my voice would lead to action at the community level. Soon after I joined the CAC, we were approached by Beacon Climate Action Now about a campaign to ban gas in new construction. I quickly signed up with BCAN to help craft the language of the proposed legislation. VCAS has covered the details of that story, but I'm very proud to say and repeat that 6 months after the campaign began, Beacon City Council voted unanimously to pass the electrification law, becoming the third city in New York State to do so, and of those, the city with the earliest implementation timeline. I want to close with a few thoughts gleaned from my limited experience of electrifying existing buildings. Home and workplace electrification is one way for individuals to close the gap between climate awareness and climate action. Building decarbonization provides an opportunity to set our own personal energy policy. Even if we don't own our own homes and workplaces, we can choose or at least influence how they are heated and how the electricity is sourced. While the technical challenges of electrification are often perceived as complex, I'm convinced that they are not inherently complex. At its most fundamental, electrification is simply optimizing the building envelope to the extent attainable and replacing fossil fuel combusting machines with renewable energy powered machines. Even when you throw in a car, that's only 5 machines. But even if the process is not complex, the personal challenges may at times be complicated. Electrification of existing buildings involves people, and people and their stories can be complicated. This is the face of demand-side decarbonization. Electrification requires dealing with different levels of awareness, motivation, financial means, financial priorities. It requires sensitivity to personal preferences, to political perspectives, and personal priorities. It can be complicated to convince someone to let go of the primal feeling that they aren't really cooking unless they are setting something on fire, or to let go of the fear that others are conspiring to take away their gas range. In addition to the personal nature of the challenge, there remains the monumental scale of so many electrifications ahead of us. Action at that scale of the individual is empowering, but the global scale of the work required is daunting. In Beacon alone, there are 5,200 existing buildings to be electrified. In New York State, there are 6.2 million, which is almost 1,200 of these screens. How do we reach all these people? How do we navigate the challenges of who they are and how their home was built? What addresses both the complicated nature of people and the global scale of decarbonization? I look forward to tackling these questions with you in the discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Amazing. I really appreciate your thoughts there at the end about this is social practice, and as much as it is technical or engineering. So I have a few questions for you, and if folks have questions, you can put them in the chat, or we can transition to taking questions from the audience as well. But I wanted to just start off with something that struck me, Thomas, in watching your presentation. There was a moment where you said you almost put gas at the start of your renovation, and you're glad you didn't. But can you just remind us, like, when did full electrification of buildings really become feasible, as it feels like it is now? When did you feel that sea change?
I mean, I think it really depends on who you ask. And I think the answer is probably going to be different depending on who you ask. There have been people who have been promoting full electrification for quite a long time. You know, passive house people, architects, engineers, I mean, people who are tuned in to the fact that, well, you can't have carbon-free heat with machines that are burning fossil fuels. So you get that connection that in order to take advantage of renewables, in order to engage out in the phase out of fossil fuels, you need to have machines that can take advantage of renewable energy. But as you say, it has taken a while to reach a sort of a more widespread level of consciousness. And so for us, we're going back 10 years, right? So to the point where we started making decisions about what sort of equipment would be we would be using. So it was something that I was sort of vaguely aware of, but certainly not to the degree that I am today. I mean, it's absolutely unthinkable that I would ever purchase another fossil fuel combusting machine again. But at the time, it wasn't in the front of mind. I mean, even just what you think about what the last couple of years have meant for awareness about heat pumps, for example, it's kind of incredible that it has reached a greater level of awareness, and that does need to happen. But we can't assume that that awareness is across the board. And so there are people out there who are faced with these same decisions, like, oh, how am I going to heat my building? And they're making the decision to use gas. And it's kind of incredible, but that is part of the task, is sort of reaching those people. I don't know if that answers your question, but I think in those last 10 years, it shows an evolution of what is sort of seems obvious today in 2023, but much less so back then.
Yeah. It's just for us all to take a moment and just acknowledge, like, it feels like it's at this nice tipping point now. So we got our work is to help push that along. I wanted to ask, maybe this is a question for both of you, or maybe more because, but the All Electric Buildings Act was approved by the New York State Legislature in May, as you said, just a few weeks after the BCAN bill passed. And so we were curious, what does that mean for your local law? How do those two pieces of legislation interact? And do you know if there was any spark that you created in BCAN that helped push that forward up at the state level?
Yeah, I can take that. Yeah, so it is true. We passed our local version of the All Electric Buildings Act. And a couple weeks later, we knew that right when it passed and we were getting a bunch of media attention, that there was negotiations going on kind of in the back rooms for the one house budgets, and which is the state legislative budgets for each chamber. And then a few weeks later, the final budget got passed, and that also included a version of the All Electric Buildings Act. BCAN's law is significantly, I would say, simpler and addresses this issue with a closer to the correct level of urgency than the state legislation, or what is now policy at the state. The state phases in over a few years and only starts in 2025. BCAN is an across the board kind of end to new fossil fuels in new buildings, and includes some gut renovated buildings, which is not in the state version, starting January 2024. So in just a few months. And this is maybe a good moment to mention that it was written in a way to be easily adoptable by other municipalities in this region. And so, yeah, if I probably should have included a link to it in my version of the presentation, but it's easy to find, / you can contact me for the draft. Yeah, so it's hard to know. There's so many moving pieces at the state level. But it certainly didn't hurt that there was a lot of statewide media attention about this, new region of New York supporting this thing unanimously right as they were negotiating it.
Great. Yeah, I was just curious if you had contact with your local electeds who were working and operating at that state level, and if this was a goal to kind of bubble things up in that way.
Yeah. Part of the reason why BCAN is kind of explicitly political in the work that we do is we can't rely on, to be frank, we can't rely on too many elected officials to support the things that we work on. So our current state senator is, in last December, put out a petition against the banning of gas stoves. So he's not an ally on this. And our current state representative was technically a co-sponsor of the All Electric Buildings Act. But my theory is that he did that to make it hard to organize against him on the topic, because he throughout the campaign, and even when we won and knew it was going to be unanimous, declined to publicly support us, write a statement, come speak, send a representative. We offered a lot of different options to help, and he declined it all.
Okay. And you had mentioned, like I said, working on the inside, right? There in BCAN, had you already had some discussions with people on the inside about this particular issue of banning fossil fuels before you chose that as the campaign focus?
This is Thomas might have some additional insight here, but I'll fill in if I'm missing it. But Councilmember Dan Amar Blair had brought this up as a topic in Beacon City Council, in a Beacon City Council meeting in early 2020, I believe, and was told that this was not possible to do at a local level. This is also some of the initial feedback we got when we first started this campaign, that we were preempted by state law. But there are ways, you know, to write legislation in this case that wasn't preempted. And so I think one thing that BCAN did that actually, and Thomas was extremely helpful here, is we like called in people who kind of were experts in the field and helped draft a piece of legislation that was something that municipality could get behind.
Yeah, Vikas mentioned, you know, the issue of preemption. Ultimately, and that was sort of a roadblock early on when Dan Imarbear had brought this up. Ultimately, the legislation is a revision to the building code. It effectively creates a stretch code for building efficiencies, energy efficiency. So it basically, in that way, was able to circumvent the sort of emissions question and the regulating of emissions, which was at the heart of the preemption issue. But Dan's early work, I think, in some ways set the groundwork, certainly for kind of an inside component to this campaign, which was, I felt, yeah, I think we all felt was incredibly helpful to have his support and the support of Paloma Wake, another council member. Ultimately, we did get, I think, unanimous support. I mean, it was unanimously adopted, and we did have a wide range of support. So I think, you know, working off of that, I think was a great sort of, yeah, as you say, inside move, inside game.
Yeah. And did you tell us more about, because you mentioned you got support from, was it Food and Water Watch, to support your BCAN grassroots organization? And I thought that was so interesting as a new, you know, as a fresh new grassroots organization. What did Food and Water Watch bring to the table that was so helpful, and how did that happen? That might be useful for those of us in the audience that are thinking about how to organize.
Yeah, I would say probably not every campaign needs like a big partner, but in this one, it did come in handy, especially because we were trying to, you know, drafting legislation requires, you know, some knowledge and relationships that we didn't have. And so Food and Water Watch was able to facilitate some connections. They have a professional full-time communications person. And so when we needed a press release written, or, you know, we're reaching out to media for our press rallies and conferences, they have those relationships and had the time to kind of help with that front. What else? And then, yeah, and I think they offered just a bunch of advice and perspective. They were, you know, involved. They weren't the leads, but were involved in the New York City electrification law that passed in 2021, late 2021. And so they had some context from the city that was helpful for us as well. And so, yeah, I think I think what I was trying to communicate is you don't want to burn out your volunteers, and you also need to recognize what capacity and skills your volunteers have. So BCAN, about 2/3 of BCAN has never been part of an organization like this before. And we're now, I checked yesterday, our Google group has 67 people in it. So these are active folks, which just means like it's helpful to have folks who have been in this for a while on board as well. And so if that's the case for where you all are, partnering with someone, partnering with a staffed org can be very helpful.
Cool. Yeah, so interesting. And were there, when you were first, I mean, I know in the end you had unanimous support, which is amazing, but can you talk a little bit about whether you encountered any pushback, or how did you get the buildings department on board and the code enforcement officers? How did that work? Were you interacting with groups like that and cajoling them into this? What? Tell us more.
Um, I will say that maybe Thomas has is a good one for this question here, but our first step was we brought this to our first step into the bureaucracy of city government was to present to the Conservation Advisory Committee. And that's how Thomas found us. But I'm trying to think. I don't we made sure to dot our I's and cross our T's in terms of how the legislation was written. But I think a lot of that was done by, council member Imar Blair and Paloma and Wake, who, in communicating with our city administrator and our buildings department, to kind of figure that stuff out. But Thomas, I don't know if you have additional things to add.
No, I think you've said it very well. I would only just reinforce the importance of utilizing some of the existing framework, sort of legislative framework or decision-making framework within the city. And, the CAC, starting with the CAC, I think was a really, really smart move and a way to sort of bring the outside game closer to the inside game. The CAC is there to advise the city on issues exactly like this. So that, combined with, as you say, the sort of support from the council members, I think was a way to leverage those existing structures, these existing power structures, I guess, if you will, to do the work that you mentioned, Vanessa, that, you don't have to go and knock on the building inspector's door. That's the work of the city administrator, for example. So, and the city attorney, for example, and that's actually just to mention it, I think it's worth pointing out that the city attorney did some really good work in terms of crafting the legislation in its final format. But I don't think it's necessarily important for a group like BCAN to say, okay, we need to schedule a meeting with the city administrator or the city attorney. I think it's really work for the council members to take on. So, using what leverage you can to kind of lever up and gain access to decision-making power. And I think BCAN did that very effectively. But, also say that I think the probably at play in all of this, and it's worth saying again and again, is the mobilization of community support. So the work that BCAN was doing by knocking on every single door and getting signatures was hugely effective in all of those subsequent decisions. And I think a key part of this. So anybody's listening who's thinking about, well, can we really do this on the local level? Can we really make change? Absolutely, 100% you can, by getting people mobilized. Applying that energy, that influence to the existing levers of power is great and smart. And I think we did a really great job at doing that. But yeah, can't overemphasize the importance of that, the movement aspect of it.
Yeah, so impressive how many doors you knocked on. That is a huge feat. And, you know, it's just really inspiring to see how it paid off all throughout the campaign. Maybe just one more question from me, and then I think we have some questions from the audience. Thomas, I wanted to turn back to your role as a commercial landlord and see if you had any thoughts around organizing to get commercial landlords moving along and undertaking the kind of work that you did with your building.
Wow. I don't know if I have an easy answer to that, although it would maybe deflect a little bit and say that at least with new construction, you see that electrification is being embraced from the get-go. I think you might have more of sort of complaints for people who are doing adaptive reuse, or more maybe people trying to make arguments of why it can't happen. And one of the reasons why I really felt like, hey, this was important to show that it could happen. It's not perfect, but it absolutely can happen. But yeah, I think you're seeing it more and more that people are from the get-go going all electric. You see quite a few multifamily units going in Beacon under construction, 100% electric in most cases. I think from an operating standpoint, it's much better, not only because of the inherent efficiencies with heat pumps, for example, but just from a perspective of business decisions, like this is the way of the future. And people who are developing buildings, owning, if they own buildings, you're not going to make short-term bets. You might have some bad examples of people who are really only thinking about the bottom line on a year-to-year basis. But I think most people who are in this really are interested in a slightly more, longer term bet. Buildings last for, at least 50 years. And 50 years from now, people are not going to be burning fossil gas the way they are currently to heat homes and hot water and cook food. So I don't know, that's sort of a rambling way to not really answer the question about mobilizing other commercial property owners, but I can serve as an example, or we can serve as an example of how you can do this, and with really no sacrifice. It's not like we have a sign on the front door that says, all ye who enter must wear, several layers of sweaters and parka. It's like, no sacrifice. The building isn't being poisoned with gas. We're heating the building efficiently, and we're proven
and cooling. I mean,
never
mind no sacrifice. You also have air conditioning, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was just like unthinkable. This is the first time I've had air conditioning in my home in my entire life. So it's like, talk about beautiful futures. Just to give a plug to what Vikas mentioned, the current BCAN campaign. It's a beautiful future, the electrified future.
Great, thank you so much. If there are any questions from the audience, feel free to raise your virtual hand or come off of the or come onto your video and raise your real hand. And I know someone in the chat asked, can we find a copy of the Beacon's Electric Building Act? And Vikas supplied a link. It's great. We'll probably also email that out.
I guess we were very thorough.
Oh, Simon, go ahead.
Thanks, Vanessa. Are you guys aware of, other than the City of New York's local law for electrification, are there other all-electric building local laws out there? And did you guys model yours on the New York City law, or where did you get your model from?
Because you want to take that?
Sure. So we started as okay, so there are about, at this point, I think like 100 municipalities in the country by at the last I checked that have done something like this locally, in the various flavors of building electrification laws. That's according to the Building Decarbonization Institute. They have a list somewhere. But I believe we're still only 3 in New York. We initially looked to model our law after New York's. What we liked about New York's is it was 3 pages, if I remember correctly, like a very simple law. The problem is that's where the preemption issue comes from. New York is preempted from state law, and so they can pass really simple policies. Well, not preempted from state law in this way, at least. Then we looked to Ithaca, and Ithaca had a very comprehensive, but intimidating version of the law where it was altered the building code. And so I think it was like literally 70 pages. Not that pages is everything, but like it gives you a sense of how kind of complex that version of the writing was. And so we tried to split the difference. And then I think, as Thomas said, our city attorney was extremely helpful in like finding a solution that was like he did the work to make sure that what we found was not preempted by state law, but also just a couple pages of legalese. But if you want to check out other municipalities and the various ways that they do things, I'm partial to the way BCAN solved the problem, or Beacon solved the problem. But the Building Decarbonization Institute would be a good place to go.
Great.
Yeah, so sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to add briefly to that, the basic, as Vikas was saying, we were looking for something straightforward. And in both the New York City legislation and the Beacon legislation, the message is effectively the same. Thou shalt not use fossil fuels in new construction. The way they go about doing it is slightly different. With Beacon, it's essentially a stretch code approach. So that they're different, but I think the simplicity of it, I think, is really one of the appeals, and I think makes it more likely to be easily adopted by other people. They can say like, oh well, I see what happened in Beacon. I can easily see just changing a few words and making this work for our community.
And just a clarifying question. What you passed in Beacon, is it for commercial new buildings, or does it include residential? Can you speak, just give us, I realize I should have done this maybe at the beginning, just a brief, like what does it cover?
It's all new construction. So residential, commercial, all new construction and major renovations. And the threshold for major renovations was something like, I don't remember the exact wording, but it's 75% of wall surfaces, floor surfaces, or something like that. There were a few exemptions placed into the language, and one of them was for commercial kitchens. And that was something that we really fought back on. I think, the perception, and this is something, that New York City lost this battle as well, right? The commercial kitchens are exempted from the gas ban in New York City. At the end of the day, yeah, so I mean, I do feel like the resistance to gas equipment, or to, I'm sorry, to using electric equipment, all electric equipment in commercial kitchens is completely overblown. But one of the arguments that was made is that you know, the availability of affordable used kitchen equipment is definitely less with you know, induction ranges on the commercial level and all electric equipment. So in the end, I think we felt like this wasn't necessarily the hill that we needed to die on. So that was one of the exemptions that was passed through. But otherwise, very few exemptions. I think, what was it? Crematoriums, you know, waste treatment facilities, things like that. But really the bulk of the construction that BCAN can expect starting in January of you know, just a few months from now, will be covered.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, so I encourage everyone to check out the legislation at the link in the chat, and we'll probably email that out as well. And thank you so much to Vikas and Thomas for spending time with us this morning, and for answering all these questions. I'm going to pass it on to Paige to close us out.
Great. Yeah, I just want to echo Vanessa. Thank you to our great speakers. You have been so thoughtful, and this is really inspiring. And like we said, we will follow up with some resources. We'll email all of you things that have been mentioned and more. And please mark your calendars for our next morning coffee session, which will be on Tuesday, December 12th at 8:30 a.m. as they always are on Tuesdays at 8:30. We'll have Stephanie Mills from the Post Carbon Institute, who is a renowned author and lecturer on ecological restoration, community economics, and voluntary simplicity. She'll be speaking about bioregionalism. So thanks so much again. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Vikas and Thomas.